Did you know that a life-changing event, one that many would expect to bring clarity, could become the catalyst for an unspeakable act of violence? What started as a simple trip to a paternity test quickly turned into a chilling sequence of events that no one could have predicted. The night began with an innocent drive, but it ended with an unimaginable crime that would send shockwaves through a community. What happens when the truth becomes too much to handle? How could someone go from a seemingly normal interaction to committing a brutal murder, leaving behind nothing but devastation and a helpless child? This wasn't just a crime. This was an act of violence that seemed to erupt from nowhere, with no warning and no remorse. In today's video, we will unravel the horrifying story of what happened that night. A young woman's life was taken far too soon, and a child was left abandoned, alone on the side of the road. But there's so much more to this tragedy than meets the eye. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling details of this case, revealing the sequence of events that led to one of the most shocking murders you'll ever hear. A story that is as disturbing as it is heartbreaking. Welcome to True Crime Files, where we explore the darkest corners of real-life crime stories. Each case we uncover brings you closer to the truth, no matter how disturbing or heartbreaking it may be. This is a place where the most chilling crimes are told in their rawest form, revealing the untold stories that need to be heard. If you're passionate about true crime, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. By doing so, you'll never miss a story that could send a shiver down your spine. Join us as we peel back the layers of these cases and bring you the details you won't find anywhere else. Jasmine Rain Dunbar was a 26-year-old woman, full of life, with dreams and aspirations. She had always been a dedicated mother, looking out for her young child and trying to make the best of life. But on that fateful night in 2018, Jasmine's life would be cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. To those who knew her, she was warm-hearted, caring, and someone who could brighten up any room. Yet, behind her smile, there was an ongoing struggle, a relationship that had been fraught with tension, uncertainty, and conflict. Antwaun T, Ware, her ex-boyfriend, was the man she once trusted. But their relationship had become a source of immense turmoil. He was a 27-year-old man, someone who on the surface appeared to have it all together. However, his actions would reveal a much darker side. Ware had a history of volatile behavior, and his relationship with Jasmine had been far from stable. They shared a complicated past, filled with ups and downs. But it was clear to those around them that their relationship had deteriorated in the months leading up to the tragedy. Though they had separated, their paths still crossed, especially when it came to their infant child. A paternity test was the reason they were together that night, heading out on what should have been a routine trip, a moment meant to clarify the truth. But instead of resolving their past, that evening would be the start of a devastating new chapter in both of their lives. What was meant to be a simple moment of clarity would turn into a nightmare, leaving an entire community questioning how such violence could unfold between two people who once shared a bond. As they traveled together, it was unclear what Ware's true intentions were, but what would unfold in the hours ahead would mark the beginning of one of the most horrifying tragedies anyone could imagine. On the evening of March 6, 2018, Jasmine Rain Dunbar and Antwaun T were driving through the streets of Phoenix, Arizona, on their way to a paternity test. A test that, for many, is just a formality, a way to clear up questions, settle uncertainty, and move forward. For Jasmine and Antwaun, it was far more than that. It was a day loaded with unresolved emotions, a day that had the potential to change everything. The drive itself seemed like any other, but the tension between them was palpable. Their relationship had been rocky, filled with arguments, accusations, and a strained attempt at co-parenting. What should have been a simple appointment at a clinic had become the symbol of their fractured connection. They were no longer the couple who once shared dreams and plans. Instead, they were two people tied together by the presence of their child, but little else. The unresolved emotions from their breakup were hanging heavy in the air, unsaid, but felt deeply. For Jasmine, The appointment was not just a matter of confirming paternity. It was about finding some form of closure. She had been hoping for peace, something to help her move forward and rebuild her life. But for Antwaun, it was different. The weight of the situation seemed to trigger something inside him, a deeper anger that had been simmering beneath the surface. His actions that evening, unbeknownst to Jasmine, were already set in motion. As they made their way toward the clinic, something shifted in the car. A sudden tension filled the space between them, something that neither could fully control. In a brief moment, the history of their broken relationship seemed to explode, taking them both to a point of no return. No one knows exactly what was said in the car, what words were exchanged in the heat of the moment, but what we do know is that by the time they reached a quiet stretch of road near 107th Avenue and Camelback Road, something had gone terribly wrong. In a flash, the mundane had transformed into a terrifying reality. Antwaun's rage, already a force that had been building over time, overtook him. What began as a simple trip to settle a question became the scene of a horrific, irreversible act. Jasmine had no way of knowing that the man she had once trusted would turn on her in such a violent way. What should have been a day of answers would instead become the beginning of an unspeakable tragedy. On the evening of March 6, 2018, Jasmine Rain Dunbar and Antwaun T were driving through the streets of Phoenix, Arizona, on their way to a paternity test. A test that, for many, is just a formality, a way to clear up questions, settle uncertainty, and move forward. For Jasmine and Antwaun, it was far more than that. It was a day loaded with unresolved emotions, a day that had the potential to change everything. The drive itself seemed like any other, but the tension between them was palpable. Their relationship had been rocky, filled with arguments, accusations, and a strained attempt at co-parenting. What should have been a simple appointment at a clinic had become the symbol of their fractured connection. They were no longer the couple who once shared dreams and plans. Instead, they were two people tied together by the presence of their child, but little else. The unresolved emotions from their breakup were hanging heavy in the air, unsaid, but felt deeply. For Jasmine, the appointment was not just a matter of confirming paternity. It was about finding some form of closure. She had been hoping for peace, something to help her move forward and rebuild her life. But for Antwaun, it was different. The weight of the situation seemed to trigger something inside him, a deeper anger that had been simmering beneath the surface. His actions that evening, unbeknownst to Jasmine, were already set in motion. As they made their way toward the clinic, something shifted in the car. A sudden tension filled the space between them, something that neither could fully control. In a brief moment, the history of their broken relationship seemed to explode, taking them both to a point of no return. No one knows exactly what was said in the car, what words were exchanged in the heat of the moment. But what we do know is that by the time they reached a quiet stretch of road near 107th Avenue and Camelback Road, something had gone terribly wrong. In a flash, the mundane had transformed into a terrifying reality. Antwaun's rage, already a force that had been building over time, overtook him. What began as a simple trip to settle a question became the scene of a horrific, irreversible act. Jasmine had no way of knowing that the man she had once trusted would turn on her in such a violent way. What should have been a day of answers would instead become the beginning of an unspeakable tragedy. The events that unfolded that night would forever haunt anyone who learned the truth. What began as an uncomfortable but seemingly harmless trip quickly turned into a nightmare. At some point, as they reached a secluded area near 107th Avenue and Camelback Road, Antwaun T, where his emotions took over. His anger, which had simmered beneath the surface for so long, erupted with devastating force. What exactly happened in those final moments is unclear, but what we do know is that in an instant, Jasmine was no longer just a mother of his child. She had become a victim of his unchecked rage. It was there, in that desolate location, that Antwaun punched Jasmine repeatedly. The physical confrontation between them escalated, and in those moments, Jasmine's life was stolen from her. She had no way of escaping the wrath that had been unleashed. Left lying in that field, Antwaun did not immediately flee the scene. Instead, he took further steps to ensure that his violent act would not easily be discovered. His next actions were as cold as they were chilling. Ware poured gasoline over Jasmine's body. In his hands, the flames of violence became literal as he set the body on fire. Watching as the flames consumed her, the fire would burn out on its own, but the damage had already been done. In the aftermath, Antwaun's mind seemed clouded with panic and fear. As the fire died, leaving behind only the remains of what was once a woman full of life, Ware left the scene, but not without first ensuring that the tragedy would affect more than just him. He drove away, but the presence of their baby, still in the back seat, haunted him. The child, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded, was left alone, abandoned on the side of the road. Antwaun thought he could escape the consequences of his actions, but he couldn't erase the fact that he had left behind a helpless infant. In the early evening hours, a couple passing by the area discovered the baby. They saw the child, still in a car seat, alone on the side of the road, with Jasmine's personal items scattered nearby. Immediately, they alerted the authorities, setting into motion the chain of events that would lead to the discovery of the unimaginable crime. Police quickly arrived at the scene, and the search for answers began. As investigators followed the trail, they pieced together the grim truth. They learned that Jasmine and Antwaun had been on their way to a paternity test, and when they tracked down Antwaun's whereabouts, they found his car parked near the scene. Hours later, police would arrest him at his home, and in an unsettling moment, he confessed to the murder. His chilling words confirmed what had already been revealed by the evidence: the brutal act of the fire and the abandonment of his child. The discovery of Jasmine's body would haunt investigators for days, as they tried to make sense of such violence. But it wasn't just the crime itself that struck the community. It was the coldness with which it had been carried out. A young woman's life was lost, and her child was left to face a world without the mother who loved her. The consequences of Antwaun T, Ware's actions would be felt for a lifetime, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been touched by this tragic event. The horrific crime that unfolded on the night of March 6, 2018, did not end with the discovery of Jasmine's body and the rescue of her child. It was just the beginning of a long and painstaking legal battle that would leave everyone involved searching for some form of justice, some sense of closure. Antwaun T. Ware, after being arrested and questioned by police, could no longer deny the severity of his actions. Facing overwhelming evidence, he made the decision to plead guilty to first-degree murder and felony child endangerment. In court, there was no attempt to defend his actions. The coldness of his crime was undeniable, and the weight of his confession would forever mark him as a man who had committed an unforgivable act. Ware's guilty plea was a step toward accountability, but the true sense of justice, for many, would not come until the day of sentencing. When the day finally arrived, the courtroom was filled with the grief and anger of those who had known and loved Jasmine. Her family, friends, and even those who had followed the case were all present, seeking some form of retribution for the life lost in such a brutal manner. The judge, with careful consideration, sentenced Antwaun T. Ware to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a sentence meant to ensure that he would never again walk free, that his actions would have consequences that would last until his final days. The weight of his crime would stay with him for the rest of his life, a life now defined by the irreversible harm he had caused. In a statement to the court, Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell expressed her deep sorrow over the loss of Jasmine, while emphasizing that no sentence could truly bring her back. She stated, "This defendant's callous actions have no place in our community. Thanks to the hard work of my prosecutors, he will live the rest of his life behind bars." Jasmine's family also spoke out, describing the devastating impact her death had on their lives. They spoke of the joy she had brought them, and the painful void left by her sudden and violent departure. "No one should ever have to go through this," her mother said, her voice cracking with emotion. "She was taken from us, and we'll never be the same." The legal consequences, while important, didn't offer the kind of peace they had hoped for. No amount of punishment could erase the pain of losing a daughter, a sister, and a mother. The pain of her child, who would grow up without ever knowing the woman who had given her life, was a constant reminder that no punishment could truly make things right. Now, as we reflect on the actions of Antwaun T, where we must ask, was justice truly served? Is a lifetime behind bars enough to pay for the loss of a life, the destruction of a family, and the abandonment of a child? What are your thoughts on the sentencing? Was the punishment fair, given the nature of the crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. On the evening of March 6, 2018, Jasmine Rain Dunbar's life was tragically cut short by the very person who should have been there to protect her. What began as a simple trip to a paternity test between her and her ex-boyfriend, Antwaun T, Ware, turned into a nightmare that would shake an entire community. In a moment of rage, Antwaun brutally attacked Jasmine, leaving her body in a secluded field and setting it on fire in an attempt to erase the evidence of his crime. But he couldn't erase the life that had been lost. He couldn't erase the pain left in the wake of his actions. After abandoning their infant child by the side of the road, Antwaun's violent actions were uncovered, and the investigation that followed revealed the horrifying truth. Jasmine's family, devastated by the loss, could only watch as the legal system worked to hold Antwaun accountable for his actions. His confession led to a guilty plea, and in the end, Antwaun was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The justice that followed, while necessary, could never replace what was lost that night. Jasmine's life, her presence, and the future she could never see. The question remains, was the punishment truly enough? Was justice served? Or is there something more that can never be repaired? If you want to hear more true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.